All right, so you're here with us because you want to get right to the heart of how things work in American politics. And today, well, we're diving deep into a process called reconciliation. Basically, it's how the House and Senate might actually find some common ground to get stuff done in 2025.
Yeah, you got it. Right now, things are pretty divided in Washington. It can feel like the two sides are never going to agree. So reconciliation, it's kind of become this crucial tool for getting things moving when everyone's stuck. It lets certain budget-related bills slide through the Senate with just a simple majority vote.
So you can skip that whole 60-vote filibuster thing, right?
Yep, that's the idea. It's like a shortcut, but only for very specific situations.
Okay, so let's set the scene here. We've got a Republican-controlled House by a slim margin, 221 to 214. And then over in the Senate, the Democrats are calling the shots with 51 seats to the Republicans' 49. Of course, Vice President Walz gets to break any ties.
Right, right. So we're already seeing the potential for gridlock, right? That's why understanding reconciliation is so important. It might be the only way anything gets done this year.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've been looking at all sorts of analyses, trying to figure out what the political climate's like, what could get in the way, what might actually work, and what the experts are saying.
Yeah, we're trying to give you the whole picture, figure out if reconciliation is even realistic in 2025, and what it could mean for the future of U.S. politics.
All right. So first things first, it's 2025. And let's be honest, things feel super polarized. It seems like the House and Senate are coming from totally different planets when it comes to their goals.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, look at Speaker Johnson in the House. He's pushing a pretty conservative agenda. Remember the Secure the Border Act from back in 2023?
Yeah, that was a big one.
It sailed through the House, more border wall, tougher asylum rules, the whole 9 yards. But in the Senate, dead on arrival. No surprise there, given who's in control.
Right. And then you've got Majority Leader Schumer in the Senate. He's all about progressive legislation, like that Green New Deal for health, expanding Medicare and all that.
But the House, not having it. It's like they're speaking different languages, which is why reconciliation could be the only way to break through this gridlock, at least for certain things.
Okay, but how bad is this polarization, really?
Hmm.
I mean, haven't there always been disagreements between the parties?
Sure, but this is different. It's like we looked at a study from the American Political Science Association last year, and it showed that the gap between Democrats and Republicans is wider than it's been in 50 years. Think about it. Only 8% of lawmakers are voting across party lines these days.
Wow, 8%? That's tiny.
Yeah. Back in the 90s, it was more like 25%. That's a huge drop. It shows just how unwilling they are to work together.
And it's not just about policy anymore, is it? It feels like they genuinely dislike each other.
Exactly. There's this idea of effective polarization, a term coined by Liliana Mason. It's not just that they disagree, they think the other side is a threat to the country.
Right, right. You see that all the time online. Like even at the start of this year, you had folks on X, accounts like a Patriot Voice USA, praising Republicans for blocking what they called socialist policies. And then you had at Blue Wave 2025 accusing the GOP of just trying to score political points.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's not just about policies. It's about seeing the other side as the enemy. And that makes compromise almost impossible.
And it feels like everything around them is making it worse. The media, interest groups, all that.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got these powerful interest groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce or the Sierra Club lobbying constantly. They're pushing their own agendas, which can make it harder for lawmakers to find middle ground.
Right, right. And then you throw in the 24-hour news cycle and social media.
It's a recipe for disaster. Everything's about getting attention, being the loudest, the most outraged, nuance and compromise. Those don't get clicks or retweets.
You remember Congressman Fitzpatrick, the Republican? He tried to work on a bipartisan infrastructure bill. And Fox News just ripped him apart, called him a rhino.
Yeah, I remember that. And that kind of thing sends a message to other lawmakers, right? Don't even try to work with the other side.
So with all this division, what does it actually mean for people? Are things just going to stay stuck?
Well, there are some huge issues that need to be addressed. Healthcare, for one. We were looking at data from the Kaiser Family Foundation, and in 2024, there were still something like 28 million Americans without health insurance.
Yeah, and then there's climate change.
Yeah.
Last year was brutal. Heat waves, those massive wildfires.
Yeah.
It's clear that things are getting worse.
And yet the Climate Resilience Act couldn't even pass the Senate. That shows how hard it is to get anything done.
Right. And let's not forget the economy. The Democrats want to raise taxes on the wealthy to fund social programs, while the Republicans are pushing for tax cuts and deregulation. It's like two completely different approaches.
And all this is why everyone's looking at reconciliation so closely. It might be the only way to make any progress, even if it's just on a few specific issues.
So reconciliation sounds important, but it's not a magic wand, right? It can't fix everything.
Absolutely. It's a tool with very specific limitations. For one thing, it only works for legislation that directly impacts the budget.
So things like voting rights or immigration reform are off the table.
Generally, yes, unless you can somehow tie them to the budget, which is tricky.
Okay. And then you've got this thing called the Byrd Rule.
Right, the Byrd Rule. It's like a set of rules within the Senate that basically decides what can and can't be included in a reconciliation bill. The whole point is to make sure it's only about the budget and not a backdoor for other stuff.
So it's got to have a direct impact on federal spending.
Exactly. It's not just about being kind of related to money. It has to be a major factor. Like back in 2021, they tried to include a minimum wage hike in a reconciliation bill, but the Senate parliamentarians said, no way.
So that set a precedent.
Yeah, a big one. It showed just how strict the Byrd Rule can be.
So even if everyone wants to use reconciliation, there are all these hoops to jump through. And on top of that, we've got this crazy polarization that makes everything harder.
It all comes back to that, doesn't it? I mean, there's so little trust between the parties that finding any kind of compromise is like pulling teeth. And even within each party, it's not a guarantee that everyone's on the same page.
Right, like with the Democrats in the Senate. Their majority is so slim that they can't afford to lose a single vote.
Exactly. And we've seen before that senators like Manchin and Sinema aren't always on board with the more progressive parts of the Democratic agenda. Remember how they pushed back against parts of the Build Back Better Act?
Yeah, that was a big deal. So even within the Democrats, it's not a sure thing. And what about the Republicans? Is it any easier for them to get everyone on board?
Not really. Their House majority is thin, too, and Speaker Johnson has to deal with all sorts of different factions within his party, like the Freedom Caucus, those super conservative folks who basically oppose anything that even smells like a compromise with the Democrats.
Right, like when they blocked that debt ceiling deal last year, that was a mess. So even within their own parties, getting everyone to agree on a reconciliation bill is a challenge.
It is. And then you add in all those external pressures we talked about, the interest groups and the media.
It just feels like it creates this environment where cooperation is impossible.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the 2026 midterms looming over everything. Every decision lawmakers make this year will be under a microscope.
They're all worried about getting reelected, right?
Of course. We saw a poll earlier this year that showed most voters want action on healthcare costs, but they don't trust Congress to actually do anything about it. So lawmakers are caught between needing to deliver results and being afraid to compromise.
It's a tough spot to be in. So with all these obstacles, is there even a chance that reconciliation can actually work in 2025?
Well, despite all the challenges, there might be some areas where the two sides could actually agree. Infrastructure, for one. Remember, they managed to pass that bipartisan infrastructure bill back in 2021.
Yeah, that was a surprise.
It shows that it's not impossible. And for 2025, there's this idea of green infrastructure that could gain traction.
What's that? Like solar panels and wind farms?
Yeah, stuff like that, but also things like electric vehicle charging stations that could appeal to Democrats who want to address climate change, and it could also create jobs, which is something Republicans are always talking about.
Makes sense. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, they're usually pretty pro-business, right? They estimated that every $1 billion invested in infrastructure creates something like 13,000 jobs.
Exactly. So there's an economic argument there that both sides can get behind.
Okay, so infrastructure might be a possibility. Anything else?
Well, there's also a lot of talk about supporting small businesses. Inflation has been cooling down, so there might be an opportunity to do some things to boost the economy.
And what kind of policies are we talking about here?
Well, you could see a reconciliation bill that combines things Democrats like tax breaks for small businesses that adopt sustainable practices. And then you could throw in some things Republicans want, like reducing regulations.
So find some middle ground.
Right. And there's actually a lot of public support for that kind of thing. A Pew Research poll this year found that most Americans from both parties want the government to invest in small businesses.
Okay, so there might be some potential there. But what about the actual people in Congress? Are there any lawmakers who are particularly good at finding compromise?
Absolutely. In the Senate, you've got Susan Collins, the Republican from Maine. She is known for working across the aisle, and she was a key player in getting that infrastructure bill passed.
Right, she's one of the more moderate Republicans.
And then there's Joe Manchin, the Democrat from West Virginia. He's kind of a centrist, so he often ends up being the deciding vote on big issues.
Yeah, he's not afraid to go against his own party sometimes. And what about the House? Any pragmatists over there?
Well, there's Josh Gottheimer, a Democrat from New Jersey. He's part of this group called the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is all about finding bipartisan solutions.
Interesting. So he's someone to watch.
Yeah, he's definitely someone who could help make things happen. Like last year, he proposed linking healthcare reform to deficit reduction. That kind of thinking could be really helpful in a reconciliation scenario.
Okay, so we've got a few potential heroes here. And what about those big issues we talked about earlier, healthcare and climate change? Could reconciliation actually make a difference there?
It's possible, but it would take some serious maneuvering. For healthcare, there's overwhelming public support for lowering drug prices. I mean, something like 90% of Americans want that. So a reconciliation bill could focus on things like letting Medicare negotiate drug prices.
But Republicans are usually against that,
Yeah,
right?
they are, but you could sweeten the deal by including things like tax incentives for pharmaceutical companies to develop new drugs.
So find a way to make it a win-win.
Exactly. And for climate change, a reconciliation bill could focus on clean energy tax credits. That's something some Republicans have supported in the past, and it aligns with the Democrats' goals of reducing carbon emissions.
So there might be some room for compromise there, too. And you mentioned earlier that public opinion can play a big role in all this.
It's huge. If there's enough public pressure on an issue, it can force lawmakers to take action, even if it means working with the other side. Like, think about those wildfires in California last year. They were so devastating that it led to a surge in support for federal action on climate change.
So if people make their voices heard, it can actually make a difference.
It can. And that could be a key factor in whether reconciliation happens in 2025.
All right, so we've talked about the good and the bad, the challenges and the possibilities. What's your gut feeling? Will reconciliation actually work this year?
It's a tough call. There are some reasons to be hopeful. There's a real sense of urgency to address these big issues. We saw record voter turnout last year, which shows that people are engaged and want to see results.
And there are polls showing that more and more voters want their representatives to work across the aisle.
Exactly. And as we talked about, there are some specific areas like infrastructure and small businesses where bipartisan agreement might be possible. But
There's a big but.
there is. The polarization is so deep and it's not going away overnight. Plus, reconciliation has those built-in limitations with the Byrd rule.
Right, and the Democrats can't afford to lose a single vote in the Senate.
And the Republicans are under pressure from their base to not give an inch to the Democrats.
Plus, you've got the media and social media constantly fanning the flames of division.
It all adds up to a pretty tough environment for cooperation. And even if they do try to use reconciliation, there are so many ways it could go wrong. Well, they might agree on the big picture, but then get bogged down in the details, like how much money should go to infrastructure, what specific climate provisions should be included in a healthcare bill. Those kinds of things can easily derail the whole process.
And then there's the Senate parliamentarian who can just strike down parts of a bill if they don't meet the Byrd rule requirements.
Yeah, that happened with the minimum wage thing a few years ago. It can throw everything into chaos.
So it's a risky strategy.
It is. But despite all that, I still think there's a chance it could work. We've seen bipartisan cooperation before, like with that infrastructure bill, and we've got those key players who are willing to work across the aisle.
Like Collins, Manchin, and Gottheimer.
Exactly. And public pressure could be a big factor, too. If people demand action on issues like healthcare and climate change, it could force lawmakers to find a way.
So maybe a little optimism is warranted.
Maybe. It's certainly not impossible. And if they can pull it off, even in a small way, it could create some positive momentum for the future.
But what if they can't? What if reconciliation fails? What happens then?
Well, it's not going to be pretty. Public trust in government is already at rock bottom. If Congress can't even agree on basic things like the budget, it's only going to get worse.
And that could fuel more extremism and cynicism.
Exactly. It's a dangerous path. So, yeah, the stakes are high.
So when we talk about reconciliation, it's not just about some procedural thing happening in Washington. It's about real issues that affect people's lives.
That's the point. If reconciliation works, it could mean lower drug prices, better infrastructure, more support for small businesses. Those are tangible benefits.
There's studies showing how much money could be saved on healthcare and how many jobs could be created through investments in green infrastructure.
It's all connected. And for the lawmakers themselves, this is a make or break moment.
Especially with those midterms coming up.
Right. The moderates, the ones who are willing to compromise, they could be rewarded by voters. But those who obstruct everything, they might face some backlash.
Especially those senators in tight races.
They're going to be under a lot of pressure.
And beyond individual politicians, this whole reconciliation thing could have a huge impact on how our government functions.
Yeah, if it works, it could show that bipartisanship is still possible, that our system can actually address problems. But if it fails,
It could be a sign that things are really broken.
and that could have ripple effects for years to come.
And it could also reignite that debate about the filibuster.
Oh, absolutely. Reconciliation kind of bypasses the filibuster, which gives more power to the majority party in the Senate. That's going to make some people unhappy.
You've got folks like Elizabeth Warren who want to get rid of the filibuster altogether, and then you've got Mitch McConnell who wants to keep it at all costs.
It's a fundamental debate about how the Senate should work, and reconciliation is right at the heart of it.
So as we wrap this up, what's the biggest takeaway about reconciliation in 2025?
I think the most important thing is that it all comes down to compromise. If lawmakers are willing to put aside their differences and find some common ground, then reconciliation could actually work.
But that's a big if, given everything we've discussed.
It is. But we've seen it happen before. There's that example of the 1986 tax reform, which passed under a divided government.
So there's precedent.
There is. It's just a matter of whether the current crop of lawmakers can rise to the occasion.
So what would that look like in practice?
Well, it might mean Democrats scaling back some of their climate ambitions in exchange for Republican support on infrastructure, or Republicans accepting some tax increases in exchange for policies that help small businesses.
It's all about finding those points of overlap.
Right. And those moderates we talked about, they'll be crucial in making that happen. They can act as bridges between the two sides.
And the leadership of both parties needs to be on board, too. They need to encourage their members to compromise, even if it means facing some backlash from their base.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about the power of public opinion.
Right. If people demand action, it can really push things forward.
Exactly. There are all these grassroots movements out there, and they can really amplify that public pressure.
So there are a lot of moving parts here.
There are, but if reconciliation is going to work, it'll take a combination of smart strategy, strong leadership, and a willingness to put the country's needs ahead of partisan politics.
So what are the next steps? What do we need to watch for?
Well, first of all, they need to write a bill that actually complies with the Byrd Rule. That's going to require some careful legal work. And then they need to build support within their own parties. That means whipping votes, making deals, all that good stuff.
And maybe some symbolic gestures of bipartisanship along the way.
Yeah, that could help build trust. It's a long shot, but it's not impossible. And how this all plays out will tell us a lot about the state of American politics.
It's a real test of whether our system can still function in this polarized era.
That's a good way to put it.
So that's the story of reconciliation in 2025. It's complex, it's uncertain, and it's incredibly important. We've talked about the deep divisions, the challenges, the potential areas of agreement, the key players, and the influence of public opinion. It's a lot to keep track of.
It is. And it raises a really interesting question. What is that one issue, maybe something we haven't even thought of, that could actually unite Congress and make reconciliation happen? Something to think about.
Yeah, what could actually break through this gridlock?
Yeah.
That's the million-dollar question. Anyway, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a fascinating conversation. We hope you've learned something about this crucial process.
I second that. It's an important topic.
And we encourage you to keep learning about how American politics works. It's more important now than ever.
It is. All right. Well, that's all from us for today.
Thanks for listening.
Take care.